Welcome back. My name is Vivian Degwa and Good Morning Kenya gets to continue. Right now, we talk about climate and our topic of conversation is climate change and psychological impact on vulnerable populations, specifically in the country that is Kenya. And joining me for this conversation, I have my panelists already here with me, and I will start introducing them from my immediate left. We have Doreen Wachira. Doreen Wachira is the lead psychotherapist at Rabah Care Center. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Vivian.
All right, right next to Doreen, we have Festus Odingo. Festus is a climate data expert. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
All right, and then on the far left, we have Sarah Mabanja. I got it right? Yes, yeah. Sarah Mabanja, and she is from Gale International.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. All right, so we get to talk about climate change and psychological impact to the vulnerable populations of this country. And before we just get into that, COP29 just concluded. It happened from the 11th to the 22nd of this month at Azerbaijan. So maybe if you can just mention a bit about what the focus was on matters climate, just a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think the historic COP29 was, I think it was all about climate action and what finances actually needs to go in that. And this call actually was from the Global South to really see how the greatest polluters actually could support the climate financing aspect of it. Now, and we saw the historic walkout from the negotiations room when they couldn't reach a deal. I think it happened at a peak when the developed countries actually mentioned $250 billion. Yeah. And then they had a few days and they made it actually to 300. Well, still below what we really expected. But I think that there's need for some self-consciousness towards climate action itself, so that people, well, worst part of it is that the countries actually who suffers the most contributed less to that, and that is the bottom of the conversation. Okay. So worst polluters need to take action, they need to take responsibility, and see really what they can do about it. But at least $300 billion is something to go by to start with. So why not?
Okay.
Yeah,
so that's what has been happening in the international, you know.
Yes. But of course, there are also other elements of negotiations. The previous COP mentioned that aspects around moving from fossil fuels to something else, like renewable energy. So that didn't really get the momentum as we expected. So it shifted really much on the financing aspect.
All right, let's shift gears now to just Kenya in particular. Maybe if you can just tell us the highlights on Kenya's climate change right now. What is our highlight when it comes to climate?
I would say that what is happening about climate change in Kenya is that first, it's a reality. It's happening, and we have to accept that climate change is happening today, and it's not just happening, but it's affecting people's lives, it's affecting communities' lives. We have seen the negative impacts, and it's actually threatening. It's calling upon all of us. If I go back to what happened, especially in the beginning of this year, if anybody had not known what climate change was, at least we got to know now the meaning of climate change with the floods that we had, with the landslides that we had, some communities being swept away. It's something that we've never had in Kenya. Seeing a whole community swept away, life coming to a standstill, no education, no movement, and especially in the city. A city turned into a lake, people using boats in the city. Actually, these are the realities that we need to accept and think about. And so we cannot continue sitting in our comfortable places and saying that there is climate change happening in the world. It's now climate change happening in our communities. It is affecting us directly, and we cannot deny it. So we have to wake up and do something. Yeah.
And maybe just to get to echo that and pose a question to you, Madam Doreen, what's the psychological impact of climate change to people generally?
Right. Thank you, Vivian. I'll start by saying that the climate change has a significant psychological toll on vulnerable populations. And this we mention women, children, people with disability, and also the elderly. And so the psychological toll becomes so much, and also with the disparities that we know that they are there. And we see the issues around issues like gender-based violence, gender inequality, the distress gets high levels, and that brings about levels of anxiety, depression, and also issues like post-traumatic stress disorder. Because what we look at when we hear of climate change is issues like drought. We don't see beyond that. We see floods, and we don't think about what is the aftermath of these people who are experiencing all this. And I think mental health integration in all these things becomes very, very important, because if we don't take care of that, then that becomes another crisis. Because climate change and mental health, if it is not looked at, then it brings about the mental health crisis.
And you know, Kenya experienced the worst droughts in like the last 40 years. Last year, you know, in 2023 we got to experience the worst drought, and this year we have experienced the floods, and they have been crazy. You know, a lot of people got to suffer directly from the floods that happened early this year. Was it early or mid?
It was early
this year. Early this year. Maybe just how is this, you know, impacting us directly, you know, as a society? And from the drought that happened last year, how is that impacting us to date right now?
Yeah, I think from the Kenyan perspective, we got lots of floods during the long rains. We usually have the long rains within we call it the MAM, March, April, May, and then we have the short rains during the OND, that is October, November, December. What happened at that particular moment is that we experienced a lot of floods during late March, just the onset of long rains. But we also experienced that during the short rains. And remember, June, July, August was a long dry spell that translated to the drought itself. And during the onset now of the short rains, there are those flash floods that clears people of their communities and all that. Major effects, looking at the diversity of the population in Kenya. If you look at the women, what happens? It means there's no clean water that they can actually get access to. And for instance, what do? If you look at the gender roles and responsibilities that they have to look for water. If you look at the distances that they cover to go get that water, the problem comes in when they have to walk long distances. What about the children? There's that education disruption. At that level, they can't go to school because of these distances. Probably they don't even have houses that they can actually stay in. And that joins now the mental health issues, because there's stress, there's anxiety, there's depression within those households. And it affects everyone. If you look at the women, in most cases, they're the caregivers in those households. What happens is that if they are the caregivers, they got probably the elderly in those households. They got the children themselves. So there's lots of burden that is actually put on their weight with regards to the kind of responsibilities and the roles that they have to assume within that household. So the impact goes really beyond what we see, and much of it actually is also economic. You can imagine the economic fabric of those communities. Say it's a fishing industry, for instance, and most women or most people actually are employed in that industry. What happens is that if the floods, they can't work. If there are floods in certain cases, they can't get the right fish, the right fishing materials to actually have that economic activity continue. And take again, for instance, in the informal settlements, urban informal settlements, what happens? The transportation aspect, and we've seen that well elaborated there. You can't access jobs. Even the kind of sanitation that is there is actually also broken. The wash itself, water and sanitation is actually broken. And that leads now to health impacts. It means I cannot access good water, clean water. It means my exposure to waterborne diseases, cholera. That water, again, the water clogs actually also offers some kind of environment for brooding insects like mosquitoes that transmit malaria. So it's quite devastating. Yeah, the impact of climate change is actually far beyond what we see, to things that actually are unseen.
Yeah. And some would say that our preparedness really sometimes is wanting. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would agree with whoever is saying that.
Yeah.
Because we saw that we waited until it happened. Yet we had actually heard what was happening in our neighboring countries. Climate change knowledge has been there, and we've heard about it from other countries that have been affected. So, and we have also attended forums and trainings outside this country on climate change. So that one alone would have actually called us to prepare ourselves and secure maybe some situations. But we are very slow. I will say we are very slow in doing things. And I would say again that climate change doesn't allow us to go with that pace. If we go with that pace, we are going to lose the whole country. So we need to look at our infrastructures, look at these communities that are marginalized, those ones who are affected, and do something about it before it's late. Because if, most of the time we are used to waiting until people die, waiting until there is anger, waiting until people are sick. That is when we take the action. But I think at this moment we should have learned, we should learn if we haven't learned, make decisions that will save the situation in future. And this will only happen if everybody takes the responsibility. It's not about one person or one organization or the government. All of us are actually responsible. Every action that we take wherever we are makes an impact. And I think people need education again. We need more education about climate change because we are still living in denial, like I said. People have misinterpretations about climate change. You see, a whole village has been swept away, but people still want to misinterpret it in their own way. So I think we also need this knowledge and the education. We need a collaborative and a togetherness responsibility for us to do these things. Otherwise, I'm afraid that even the generation that is coming might not have a world to live in. I'm afraid that we are preparing our kids for professional development. We are preparing them with talents. We are preparing them to grow up and live. But where are they going to live? Are we preparing the world for them to live in? Where is that physical world that they are going to live in? Is it there? Is it still going to exist? That is my worry. Yeah.
That's an interesting one, right? That's a really interesting one. Well, there's this project that is already up and running, and I would love to get more information on it. That is the Weather and Climate Information Service for Africa project. Could you kindly just tell me a bit about what that project is about? Sir.
Yeah, well, I haven't really delved so deep into it, but I think the major objectives of that project here is to get the right data out of communities, and that data actually needs to be used to monitor really what is happening around. Remember, I know we're going to have conversations around data and how it needs to shape policies. It needs to shape the financing aspect, and so I think getting the right surveys, getting the right information is quite important when you want to trigger the early warning systems at the right time, the right place, so that people actually don't get affected. We should actually record minimum displacements. Food security needs to be right, and all those issues. So in matters data, I think it should be at the central role when it comes to combating issues around climate action. Yes.
All right. On psychological disorders, maybe which are the most common ones that are associated with or that are rather observed in populations that are affected by climate change?
Okay. So we get to see acute stress disorder, and this is whereby people have gotten to a point of learned helplessness, and they cannot be able to do much about that. And with time, if that is not intervened, then it brings about issues around also depression and major depressive disorders. And also we see issues around post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is whereby there are form of flashbacks, people keep on remembering what happened, and also the intrusive thoughts. And also we get to see anxiety, so much of it. And some of these disorders, if there is nothing that is done, it gets to a point of people getting to even issues around suicide. Because if, for example, there are no interventions when these things happen, they are not supported, or if they are supported initially, nothing is done after that, then what happens is that we get to see many people getting to a point of feeling every time there is that trigger, it's like a time bomb that is yet to come. Because if they know this is what happens year in, year out, and nothing is done, then people get into a form whereby they're even hypervigilant, that they cannot be able to do their normal duties without thinking this would set in. And we see there are people who are able to manage that for just a long period of time, but the others who cannot be able to get to such extent. But I must say that you realize that human beings have such a capacity within them, but it can only be to some extent. So if there is nothing that is done, no support, they are not taken through this therapy, counseling, and so that some of these disorders can get to the extreme. And we get people now being on psychotics, drugs, and they can only be able to operate when they are on medications. And so for me, prevention becomes very key before we get to that form. And this can be done if there are interventions that are put in place, especially integrating, because we see there are many things that are being done, like we see people responding when some of these disasters strike. But now, in the part of that respondents, then there must be integration of mental health services right away from the community level. So with this, it is able to be a sustainable way, because we have to ensure that we integrate mental health services and ensure that they are sustainable. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, weather forecast is of importance. And maybe if you can just tell us more or deeper on the importance of just accurate weather forecast.
Yeah, accuracy. Accuracy is very important. Normally, in Kenya, and I think weather scientists would be really better placed to give us more information, and having concerted efforts within various agencies and departments within the government, just to mention the Ministry for Environment, the National Disaster Operations Center, the Kenya Meteo Department. I think that there's need to have some kind of cross-working relation when it comes to information that is relayed, when it comes to data that needs to be used, when it comes to weather forecasting. But they always have certain indicators that they normally use. well, there are also major climate drivers, as you normally say. In Kenya here, I think they use what they call the IUDs, that is the Indian Ocean Dipole. They also have the ENSO, that is the El Nino, Southern Oscillation, and many others. And so they use this actually to see the kind of weather patterns that we have and all that. And of course, they also have various tools to collect the information. Now, it's not just the accuracy aspect. What worries me is if, say, the National Disaster Operations Center gets some information, could we actually what we call cross-analysis, or maybe cross-comparison, to see this data and the other data? Is it consistent over time? Do you have some kind of consistency in that data, which is very important when it comes to statistics or when it comes to information? We have to have some kind of consistency. So that consistency could be measured from various agencies, but we could also, as an agency or as a department, actually see whether the values that we get when it comes to, say, temperature. If we say that in the early 70s, which is the reality, that the temperature was actually 29 degrees Celsius, and that early 2020s, the temperature is now actually at 30.5 degrees Celsius. And so that differential increase, 1.5 degrees Celsius, actually is actually in tandem with the global trend. So that it should be that way. We shouldn't say that we are really off the mark, or these are whiskers. So we can't say that. So accuracy in data is very important, because now it turns back to how we're going to use that information. If you don't get the right information regarding weather or weather forecast, it means we miss it out all. If I say that June, July, August, hypothetically, it's going to be we're going to have some long rains. It's false, because we know how the pattern is. We have long rains in March, April, May, and we have short rains in October, November, December. But June, July, August, we have the long or dry spells. But in some cases, we can have short rains or here and there that actually causes those flash floods. So we have to have that right information, and that information needs to get to different departments. It needs to serve the Ministry of Education, it needs to serve the Ministry of Health, so that they can actually plan. So if we get it wrong from the right duty bearers, or the frontliners, that is the Ministry of Environment, then everyone also gets it wrong, because Ministry of Education, they're not well versed with issues of weather, so they have to rely on another. And that's why we have all these conglomerates of ministries to work together, have concerted efforts. If there's data, then that data needs to be, of course, Kenya has really tried, and KBC is doing quite a great job when it comes to data management and consolidating administrative data from various ministries, departments, and agencies to be used actually for tracking and even for formulating policy. And that's how the conversation should be. Get the right data, use it for policy for formulation. We don't start from for policy and then we get back to look for data to actually see where to put the resources. You get from the data, it tells you we need this much to tackle these people, this impact. And so let's get a policy that actually aligns or speaks to what we got in the information. And let's put the right resources so that we see how that goes back. And we implement the policy. It shouldn't remain on paper. And I know there are protagonists on policy issues here that will actually tell you that we have so many policies which are actually on paper, but we don't see the implementation. We want to see policy implementation framework actually adjusted.
All right.
Yes.
And I want to pick from that, you know, policy implementation is one of the challenges that you're pointing out. Maybe if, Sarah, you can just tell us more about what are some of the other challenges that you'd love to point out that we are currently facing, you know, as a country when it comes to such matters?
I would say that climate change is moving us from one level of poverty to another level that is worse than today. I'm saying this because every day you wake up in the morning, there is an impact of climate change somewhere, and it has affected someone. Even someone who slept as an able person wakes up as a vulnerable person because of climate change. Yeah. A woman who was stable in business or maybe in farming wakes up the following day because of climate change as a vulnerable person because her farm is flooded. Yeah. She can no longer do the agriculture that she used to do. She can no longer produce food for her small family. Mm. A child who was continuing with her education wakes up in the morning and finds that her school is the shelter for people or communities who have been affected by the climate change. Mm-hmm. And so this child's education cannot continue because she has to wait. The road that leads to her school or his school is flooded. They cannot go to school. This old person in the village and even in the city who is sick wakes up to a new climate change challenge. They are affected economically, and you know, like if we rate most of the population of the old people in Kenya, most of them live in the village, most of them depend on livestock and farming. So they wake up and this livestock is not there. So this one takes us from one level of poverty to another level, and it's even worsening, something that is not expected. Mm. You look at the knowledge that we have on climate change, it's very limited. There are very wide gaps in knowledge. You look at even the language used in interpreting what climate change is. It's very technical. Mm-hmm. People are struggling to even understand that language. Mm-hmm. When you say mabadiliko ya tabia nchi in Swahili, it could be the right word, but it sounds complex. How is my mom in the village supposed to understand that mabadiliko ya tabia nchi means the climate change effects? So language is also another problem that is actually causing the communities maybe not to react because they feel this one is not for us, it's for someone else. And then I'm looking at the education systems that we have. If we go to other countries, they revive their education system every year, depending on what is happening in their own environment. For us, life is normal. We have institutions that have Department for Environments. Are they working? What are they doing? You go to these learning institutions, we are preaching about planting trees, but they are cutting trees and planting kiosks near the schools. So what does that one mean? I mean, what are we really doing? So these effects are all over. They are affecting those ones in school. They are affecting those in the city. Look at those ones in slums. I happen to be a member of a group for the young people. We normally have sports every holiday for high school students. This time round, we didn't have them because the fields were flooded. There were no roads towards those sports fields, and some activities had to come to a standstill. So all of us are being affected in one way or the other. And these effects, the worst thing is that these effects are growing worse every day. And that's what I'm saying. It's leading us from one level of poverty to another one. Yeah, if we look at the SDG goals, goal number 1 is that poverty. Yeah, we have to fight poverty, but what is the level of poverty in our country today? In our communities today? I'm worried. Yeah.
All right. Okay, as we almost come to a close, maybe if you can just tell us, you know, does the psychological impact on climate change differ from within age groups? Does it differ within age groups?
Yeah, it differs, and like in the populations that we are looking at, when you look at the women, elderly, children, and people with disability, it differs. In this way, for example, if it is among children, of course, children can experience or can witness this kind of, you know, what is happening in terms of climate change. And you see, for them, the understanding at that moment maybe not be so deep at that moment when the experiences are there. And also, when you look at the people with disability, for them also, the way they experience it is so different with other populations. And when we look also at women, especially being the people who take responsibility of their families and, you know, they are carers and all that, it differs. For them, their way they experience is different from other populations. So when we look at it, and as I was listening to Sarah talk about all this, it brings and narrows down to what I look at as public trauma. Because you see, if we may talk of those populations, but also it is affecting us. And that's why we are discussing about this. When we witness it, when we, you know, we see the news and everything, it affects all of us. And so that's where we need to see how to come, to see how we can be able to be a support one to the other, so that we don't get these psychological effects because they affect all of us. Yes.
All right, we need to wind up on this conversation, and maybe Mr. Festus, you can do that for us. You know, we've talked about the knowledge on climate change needs to be more out here. You know, people need to have knowledge on climate change more. Maybe just from you as a climate data expert, what would you say people need to know about climate change?
I think it has been mentioned here about education, and there was a light touch on SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
And if you look at goal number 13, goal number 13 has 8 indicators. There's only one indicator that does not apply to Kenya because it talks about small islands. Of course, they are greatly affected because some of them have disappeared, some are yet to, they're on the road to actually sinking, like the Tuvalu Island, Solomon Island, and all those small islands. When it comes to our case, we are actually reporting on 6 indicators out of the, so I would say out of the 8, we're reporting on 6. So there's only one indicator that we are not actually reporting on. That is indicator 13.31, which talks about mainstreaming education, mainstreaming knowledge on climate change into the education curriculum. So the Bureau has done quite some good job in reporting on all others. But remember, this data that does not necessarily come from them. It comes from ministry departments and agencies like the NDOC, like the KMD, and the rest. Could we get an avenue to actually also track this indicator, this particular indicator, tracking issues of education? So what elements do we really need to work on? There are certain organizations around here that are doing just the minimal part of it. They're creating actually educational materials that are actually accessible to children. For instance, just giving them information about drought, maybe just some kind of drawing. A tree was once green and blossomed at some point, now it's dry and it's only the branches that are actually left there. So they relate with it. They have an environment, maybe access to a river, that river has run dry. They have access to water, there's a tap that is drawn on that picture. They used to collect water there, the taps have run dry. So things, visual aspects of stuff that actually they can relate to. And this needs to go to the education curriculum. We need to have it quite deliberate, that we teach about Earth, about the universe, about climate change, about what is happening around us. But also we need self-consciousness, that as we walk around, what we do. Because we say there are things that long died, you were discussing in the background there, the 4K clubs and all that. That long died. How do we plant trees? If you're coming from the Lower Eastern, for instance, how do you plant maybe acacia trees, for instance, because it it does well the other side. How do you do that on other platforms? So education has to be general, and climate change has to be right at the core of it.
Okay. Well, final remarks in just 30 seconds, please. Just 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm calling upon everyone to take responsibility, take a small step or a big step to make changes wherever you are, and we will grow tomorrow and survive the climate change.
All right. Final remarks, 30 seconds.
Data is very important. I think let's embrace data. Usually there are very many avenues that we can actually access data regarding climate. And I think the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics is one of those avenues if we can access. There are also very many organizations that are working around climate change, like PACJA and the others that are working on water issues, like Wasnet. So many of them still such organizations that are actually at the forefront, but we also have other entities, other NGOs like yours that are actually working on issues of psychosocial, mental health, water, and the rest of them. Let's have concerted efforts. Let's not work in our own areas and then we say it's all done. Let's have one agenda, one objective, and we'll have it done.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
Together we are stronger. Don't suffer in silence. And let's know that a healthier mind makes a healthier planet. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and just shedding light on this very important conversation that we have been having today. This is where we end this particular discussion, but don't you go too far. Good Morning Kenya gets to continue. In just a bit, I will be talking about a different topic, and that is international money transfer. Stay tuned for that.